Hi, everyone. So I'm Nasim Nobari. I'm one of the founders and the director of Seed the Commons, which is a grassroots organization based in San Francisco. And we work to transform our food systems, to reclaim our food systems from corporate control, and to promote alternatives that are independent from animal agriculture is one of the focuses, and we work on food systems because we see that as sort of a way to work towards larger, broader social change and to work towards the pressing issues of the day. I don't know amongst the participants who has been at our webinars before, who's familiar with our work, because we were away for a while. In fact, the last time we did a webinar series was during COVID, so it's been a long time. And then we had done a webinar series starting with the publication of a book called Rethinking Food and Agriculture. I wrote a chapter in that book. And so we had done a series sort of based on that. And The editors of that book, Amir and Leila Kassam, had started out their book with, before jumping into all the issues, just saying what we need is a change of values. And I think that especially on Valentine's Day, it's really good for us to keep that in mind, that what we're ultimately working towards is just a world with a different value system, a more loving world. And that sort of shift in values can help us address all of the things that we are looking at, such as climate change. So as part of sort of coming back to our activities, Seed the Commons went and attended the Peoples Summit Towards COP30, which was a alternative people-led summit to the official UN-led summit of COP30. So we attended that, and as part of this webinar series, we're going to have a report back on that experience, both COP30 itself, our thoughts about the negotiation, our thoughts on the People's Summit. We also organized a climate march in San Francisco. So when we marched in Brazil, there were people here marching in San Francisco with the same banner. So we'll talk about what worked, what didn't work, what lessons we took from that going forward. And we're going to merge it with what we'll have covered during this webinar series. So that last sort of report back, lessons learned, and bringing everything together towards next steps is going to be on February 28th. And so before that, we're touching upon a lot of issues that I think are central, both in terms of understanding problems around climate change, why we need food system change, what type of change do we need, and also what are already the solutions that we and others have been working towards. So there was a lot of media coverage around COP30, and one of the things that many rightfully pointed out, rightfully complained about, rightfully criticized was that there was just so little focus on transitioning away from fossil fuels, and no agreement reached on that, and rightfully so. However, we also have another concern that there was no focus whatsoever on grazing and animal agriculture, which is also a big part of this puzzle. And so we're kicking off the weekend with two panels that were, similar panels to what was presented in Belém, and that address these issues, in particular in Latin America, in the Americas, sorry, not only because this conference was in Brazil, but because it's so central to the broader climate question. All right, so that's my intro, and then we're going to have three speakers. They're going to cover different situations in different countries in Latin America, and then we'll keep the Q&A for the end, so people will be able to put their questions in the chat, and then I'll ask the questions from the different speakers. We have a bilingual webinar today, so I wanted to ask the participants, does anybody here need translation, interpretation from English to Spanish? So ¿Hay alguien aquí de los participantes que necesite interpretación de inglés a español? O sea, ¿hay alguien que no habla inglés aquí? Si es que sí, levanten la mano porque tenemos un intérprete que normalmente solamente va a interpretar del español hacia el inglés, pero si se necesita también puede hacer del inglés hacia el español. Ah, sería bueno, Richard K. sería bueno. Entonces sí, sí se necesita el español. Entonces, Luis, ¿puedes hacer también del inglés hacia el español? Ok, bueno. Ok, all right. Okay, so I'm going to get started. Uh, You're welcome. I'm going to get started. So, okay, the first speaker, so I attended this panel. It was a similar panel, not exactly the same, but a similar panel in Belém, and I thought it was very interesting. I thought what they were talking about was so important, and I really wanted to bring it to a broader audience. Now, a couple of the organizations, I didn't know about them. I learned about them there. But the first speaker works with an organization called Brighter Green, and I've known about Brighter Green for a very long time. I've been a fan of their work for a very long time, and I've always thought that this is the type of group that should have more visibility. So I'm very happy that ISIS is with us today, and I also want to encourage everybody afterwards to really go and check out their work, read their reports, and so on. All right. So Isis Alvarez is senior gender. Wait a second. I just need to. 1 second. Isis Alvarez is Senior Gender and Environmental Specialist with Brighter Green. She is an ecofeminist with 15 years of experience in the environmental nonprofit sector globally, actively participating in key global environmental policy spaces and social movements, working closely with civil society and engaging in networks that advocate for social and climate justice, including issues such as women's rights, community-based conservation, and sustainable food systems, among others. Since 2023, she's a consultant for Brighter Green, a think tank that focuses on the intersections of sustainability, environmentalism, and social equity, aiming to raise awareness and encouraging policy action on critical issues such as climate change, the globalization of factory farming, food systems, and animal welfare, often with an emphasis on the global south. All right. Thank you so much, Isis. I'll see how to.
Hey, hello everyone. Thank you, Nassim, for the introduction. So after the introduction, I'll do another very short introduction. So today we're going to present some of the experiences that we have been working on through the Animals and Biodiversity Reporting Fund. This fund specifically supports investigative journalism in issues around industrial animal agriculture. So,
Isis, if you like, you can speak Spanish if you prefer.
oh, I don't know. Bueno, está bien, pero bueno, era esa pequeña presentación sobre el Fondo para Reportajes en Animales y Biodiversidad, que se encarga de apoyar a periodistas investigativos, por ahora en Latinoamérica, que trabajan con temas de ganadería industrial. Entonces ahora le doy la palabra a Nassim para que presente a los periodistas con los que hemos estado trabajando, Poliana en Brasil y Patricio en Yucatán. Al final yo les haré una presentación sobre los medios con los que hemos trabajado acá en Colombia. Gracias. Over to you, Nassim.
Oh, okay. So then we'll start with Poliana. So Poliana is an investigative journalist with Reporter Brazil. She is a Brazilian investigative journalist and editor at Reporter Brazil, an independent nonprofit organization founded in 2001 and widely recognized in Brazil for exposing contemporary slavery, human rights abuses, and socio-environmental crimes. Since 2016, she has investigated human rights violations and environmental crimes across supply chains. She holds a master's degree in Brazilian studies from the University of Sao Paulo.
Hi, Nassim. Good afternoon for me. Good morning for you. Thank you for the invitation. I will share my screen with you. I will talk in my Brazilian English, so good luck to the interpreter. Well, first of all, as Nassim said, I'm Poliana. I'm an investigative reporter at Repórter Brasil. We are a Brazilian news outlet specialized in reporting human rights violations and environmental crimes. We are an organization celebrating our 2050 anniversary this year. So Repórter Brasil is on the ground for almost 3 decades. So in recent years, we have focused on investigating the environmental impacts of agribusiness activities, including commodities such as meat, soy, sugarcane, coffee. And for decades, Repórter Brasil has covered Brazil's cattle industry, not only by publishing investigation, but also by producing knowledge and data that we share with partner organizations and media outlets. So these are one of these examples of investigations that we have done in this past years. And these are some examples of investigations from other media outlets that we made in partnership or mentioned our researchers, or we helped sharing data from the cattle industry in Brazil. Now let's focus about the numbers of the cattle industry in Brazil. So in 2025, Brazil registered a record slaughter of 42.3 million head of cattle, driven by demand from China and consolidating the Brazil position as the world's largest producer of meat. Brazil produced 11 million tons of beef last year. The United States used to be the world's largest producer, and last year was the first time that Brazil became the largest producer, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. We are also the world's largest exporter. China is our main client, and 80% of all the exports from meat is fresh meat. 80% is fresh meat. And in last year, we exported 3.5 million tons of meat. And Brazil is estimated to have 106 million hectares of pastures. So these are all huge numbers because, we are a huge country and very important in this industry. So this is a dashboard about Brazil's exports to the United States last year. So you can see that the oil is the main product that we export to the United States, as products from iron ore and airships and equipments, coffee. And you can see here in yellow that carne bovina fresca, or fresh meat or frozen meat, it was 3.2% of all exported in 2025 to United States. Several publications by Repórter Brasil and other organizations have already shown that cattle ranchers with a history of social environmental irregularities are part of large meat packer supply chains. But how does this happen? So I'm using this infographic from a recent study of Human Rights Watch, and they show it's very clear. So how the supply chain has a lot of intermediaries between the original farm and the slaughterhouse. So animals usually pass through several farms before being finally sold to the meat packers. But only those who send animals from their farms to slaughter, which means the directly suppliers from the last farm to the slaughterhouse, these are the only fully mapped and monitored by the meatpacking companies. ranchers involved in social environmental irregularities often transfer their cattle from final fettering to clean properties, which means farms authorized to sell animals to slaughterhouses. So they operate under the radar, and companies are still unable to track all their indirectly suppliers. So we have these indirectly suppliers, the one in the first steps of the supply chain, and the directly suppliers. The companies, the meat companies, are able to fully map it only the directly suppliers. So we have a lot of cattle ranchers that are under the radar, and they are like doing irregularities that I'm going to mention in the next slides. So these are the ones that we should look for, the indirectly suppliers. In some cases, these indirectly suppliers, there is actual animal transfers between properties. But in other cases, it's just part of a strategy to disguise the cattle's origin. In a maneuver known as cattle laundry or triangulation. Ranchers, in this maneuver, in this triangulation, ranchers conceal the illegal origin of their animals by recording their passage through farms with no social environmental issues. In addition to these gaps, irregularities in the properties registration in the Brazilian Rural Environmental Register, which is like an ID of the farm in Brazil, and the lack of public policies for tracking cattle also lead to the marketing of animals tainted by cases of slave labor, deforestation, and invasion of public lands. So now let's look into these irregularities. So first of all, we have in Brazil the concept of slave-like conditions. I just want to quickly explain the difference between modern slavery and the concept used by Brazil. So according to the International Labor Organization Forced Labor Convention number 29, forced or compulsory labor is all work or service which is obtained from any person under the threat of a penalty or for which the person has not offered himself or herself voluntarily. In Brazil, the crime of reducing someone to conditions analogous to slavery is described in our criminal code. And any of these following four elements is enough, is sufficient for characterizing the crime. So forced labor, plus having exhaustive working hours of job is one of the elements that characterize slave-like conditions for the Brazilian law, degrading working conditions, and debt bondage, which means in Brazil we adopt a broader concept of modern slavery. So modern slavery is one of the four elements that characterizing this crime of slave-like conditions. So we did a lot of investigations about human and slave labor cases in cattle ranches that supplied directly or indirectly the meatpacking companies. Our latest investigation was published in October last year, was an investigation in partnership with the organization Climate Rights International. And we identified 8 cattle ranchers responsible for employing slavery-like labor. And we identified that these 8 ranchers were part of the supply chain of the largest meat processing companies in Brazil. So by analyzing animal transit records from 2018 to 2025, it was possible to identify that cattle from this producer were transferred to farms supplying meatpacking plants or were sent directly to the slaughterhouse, such as JBS, which is the largest meat company in the world. And I just want to say a little more about JBS, because just to give you like a brief context of how big JBS is. One of their companies in the US, this Pilgrim's Pride, which is the second largest poultry processor in the US, this company gave the largest donation of money to the second inauguration of Donald Trump last January. more than Meta, Amazon. So JBS is a really huge company, not only in Brazil, but also in the United States. Okay, back to Brazil, to the Brazilian farms. Workers who carry out tasks such as cleaning pastures for cattle breeding and later constructing fences and corrals are exposed to degraded conditions and are often subjected to conditions analogous to slavery. These are some photos of the rescue operations that are connected with this big meat processing companies. In most cases investigated by Repórter Brasil, slave labor victims slept in tents in the middle of the forest and had no access to potable drinking water. And other impacts of the meat industry in Brazil are the deforestation. Pastures are recognized as the main drivers of agricultural expansion and clearing of native vegetation in Brazil. Depression from agricultural activities such as cattle ranching is associated with over 97% of all loss of native vegetation in Brazil from 2019 to 2024, sorry. In the Amazon, the deforestation land for pastures accounts for 90% of the biome's deforestation. And between 1985 and 2023, pasture land in the Amazon jumped from 2.7 million hectares to 59 million hectares. So a lot of landing are first deforested and the ranchers put the cattle on the farm. So it's really one of the main drivers of deforestation in Brazil. And besides deforestation, we have indigenous land invasion. So illegal deforestation to expand these cattle pastures also affects protected territories such as indigenous lands. Between 2018 and 2021, 114,000 hectares of deforested indigenous land were turned into pastures, according to a research by InfoAmazonia outlet. This is the largest increase in pasture land in these territories in the last 37 years. All these record production of meat and byproducts such as leather and beef tallow came with, let's say, the dark side. So workers are subjected to slavery conditions, illegal deforestation, and invasions of indigenous land are issues that are interconnected throughout Brazil's livestock supply chain. Well, the scenario is not good, of course, but our investigation from Repórter Brasil, with the support of Brighter Green and other organizations like My Third, other organizations, have impacted changes in the sector in recent years. And I want to emphasize this one. The biggest one was when 6 European supermarket chains like Carrefour stopped selling some or all beef products from Brazil due to links with deforestation of the Amazon. We tracked beef products linked to deforestation, including products like beef jerky, corned beef, and fresh meat from Brazil to European supermarket shelves. So this was like a huge impact. And of course, besides this impact, we have all the time like small impacts. For example, JBS is not buying from this rancher that we mentioned in our investigation, but it's always like a work that we first make the article that announce, and then the company change their due diligence. It's always like in this order, not like in the opposite. Like the company should take their own responsibility and make a clear strategy to avoid this kind of human rights, environmental crimes among their supply chain. And well, I'm just finishing my part of the presentation, but I want to discuss a little bit of next steps. The growing international demand for meat and byproducts that are free from social environmental irregularities has put pressure on the industry for greater transparency. As a consequence, meatpacking companies themselves have signed sectoral agreements and commitments to produce with zero deforestation, for example. But we need more. So monitoring all links of the supply chain is something that they should do right now. Since 2009, we have in Brazil a pact called the Meat Industry Conduct Adjustment Agreement. This is an agreement signed between the Brazilian Public Prosecutor's Office and meatpackers operating in 6 states of the Amazon. The agreement aims to block the purchase of cattle from areas illegally deforested after 2008, overlapping conservation units or indigenous land, and employing labor in conditions analogous to slavery. The terms of the agreement include audits between signatory companies to assess their compliance in their purchases. And indirectly, suppliers are still the major gap in the supply chain monitoring in Brazil, according to an audit process from 2025, from last year. Just over a third of indirectly suppliers were in compliance with the agreement's criteria between 2020 and 2021. So we need to face this lack of monitoring of the indirectly suppliers. Other steps, individual and technological monitoring, which can be done using ear tags or subcutaneous chips in the animals. Is presented by monitoring is presented by experts and authorities as a more effective solution for ensuring the traceability of Brazilian cattle from birth to slaughter. Transparency, although essential for traceability, the animal transit records, which is the document that Repórter Brasil and other organizations use to have access to be able to track all the links of the supply chain from birth to the meatpacking companies, they are not available for public consultation in some Brazilian states. And these states claim that these documents contain confidential information that prevents their full disclosure. So we advocate that this kind of documents should be publicly available, so the civil society can also trace to the purchase of cattle from the meatpacking companies. Due diligence, meatpacking plants and companies further down the supply chain, such as supermarkets in Brazil, abroad, in the United States, these companies need to adopt measures to identify irregularities in the supply chains and block suppliers. And finally, public policies and new legislations. Not only companies, but countries also need to take action to curb the trading products tainted by human rights violations and environmental crimes. Europe is more advanced. This year, they will finally implement their new deforestation regulation that avoid the buying products from areas deforested after 2021, and the companies would have to prove that they are not buying this kind of products related to deforestation, and meat is one of the products that fall into this new regulation. But yeah, it's Europe. At the same time, this year, the United States has officially withdrawn from the Paris Agreement for the second time, becoming the only nation to abandon the global pact to curb climate change. So I would say that we are in a very delicate, let's say, political moment. And the climate crisis is not waiting. It's at everyone's doorsteps. But of course, some are harmed more than others. So we can't wait another second to change this. And we should pressure also the countries, the government in the United States and Brazil to make these changes and fully track the cattle supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pollyanna. That was very interesting. So we're going to leave the Q&A for each talk for the end. So we'll just take questions for everybody at the end. Okay, so to the participants, yes, as Chema just wrote in the chat, our next speaker is going to be speaking in Spanish. So if you need the English interpretation, you on the bottom click on interpretation, and then you can choose English there, and then you can just leave that. So if you like, so when somebody's speaking English, you just won't hear the interpreter, and then when someone's speaking Spanish, you'll automatically have it set to English. All right. So our next speaker is Patricio Elesegui. So Patricio Elesegui is an investigative journalist, writer, and documentary filmmaker from Argentina, currently based in Yucatán, Mexico. He has exposed the socio-environmental and health impacts of pesticide use, GMOs, and factory farms in Argentina and Mexico, and has published in different media across Latin America, the United States, and Europe. He is currently the general coordinator of the Geltun Research Platform and a close collaborator to Brighter Green. All right. Thank you so much, Patricio, for being here. And puedes hablar en español, ya tenemos la interpretación.
Okay.
Gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Un gusto, la verdad, ser parte y poder justamente comentar algunas cuestiones. No voy a compartir pantalla, la verdad es que ando un poco a las corridas con algunos temas de coberturas y demás, pero no me quería perder esta actividad y dar cuenta un poquito de lo que está pasando acá, ¿no? O sea, yo, como bien comentaban recién, no soy argentino, pero llevo ya unos años acá en la península de Yucatán, en el llamado sur-sureste de México, abordando temas de investigación. En un principio estaba más ligado a la cuestión de la biotecnología aplicada al agro y demás. Esto estoy hablando de hace 6, 7 años atrás. Pero en sucesivas visitas que comencé a hacer a esta región, empecé a tomar más contacto de lo que viene pasando con las megagranjas, sobre todo porcícolas, aquí en la península de Yucatán, un tema productivo del cual extractivista no tenía ninguna referencia. La situación en Argentina en ese sentido es muy diferente, ¿no? Sobre todo en lo que es esto de mega instalaciones de cerdos, bueno, algo completamente diferente a lo que venía acostumbrado y que desconocía por completo. Perdón, voy a tratar de hablar un poquito más despacio para que no se complique tanto la traducción. Como decía, bueno, hará 6 años más o menos, comencé una primera investigación a raíz de los comentarios que tenía en distintas comunidades. Está el sur-sureste de Yucatán, la península, sur-sureste de México quise decir, está habitada por comunidades mayas, ¿no? De todo el territorio, es muy fuerte la presencia. Y justamente en esa interacción fue que comencé a notar esta preocupación y estos problemas que se estaban dando justamente en torno a las comunidades indígenas, ¿no? Hace 6 años entonces inició un primer trabajo sobre el impacto de las megagranjas de cerdos en esta zona de México, ¿no? Y básicamente esa investigación dio lugar a un documental que se llama Una Laguna Negra. Ese documental está disponible sin ningún tipo de restricción, está en YouTube, por si quieren justamente chequearlo. Y bueno, ahí es como fue el primer acercamiento justamente a la problemática. El documental está basado en Quinchil, una comunidad que queda alrededor de 1 hora, más o menos, de Mérida, que es la capital del estado de Yucatán, bueno, y es una de las comunidades más afectadas por las megaporcícolas, ¿no? Bueno, hoy por hoy este estado es uno de los principales de la península, ¿no? Se ve impactado tanto por la actividad de las empresas que producen esta carne de cerdo de un modo intensivo, como también las productoras de carne de pollo. En ambos casos son instalaciones ubicadas en ecosistema selvático. Esta región es selvática, ¿no? Y en torno también a fuentes de agua dulce. Son dos aspectos territorio y recurso hídrico son claves para estas megagranjas, ¿no? Estas compañías empezaron a radicarse de un modo masivo en el término de las últimas 2 décadas, no es un proceso muy antiguo, ¿no? Y operan avasallando justamente, violentando los derechos de las comunidades indígenas mayas, ¿no? Por supuesto con una anuencia política, con un respaldo justamente de las autoridades que muestra que esto es un esquema, ¿no? Es un proyecto sistemático también político, ¿no? Como decía, bueno, porcícolas, avícolas, han gozado en los últimos 20 años de todo tipo de apoyos, estímulos políticos y económicos, tanto por los gobiernos en el estado de Yucatán mismo como a nivel federal, esto es ya desde Ciudad de México. Y en el último tiempo, sobre todo desde el año pasado a esta parte, este sistema de producción de carne intensiva comenzó también a evaluar otra salida a nivel exportación a partir del vínculo con un megaproyecto que está llevando a cabo el gobierno federal, el gobierno de México, en esta región, que se conoce como el Tren Maya. Quizá ustedes han escuchado nombrar, ¿no? Un proyecto que inicialmente se promocionó como una iniciativa turística de transporte de personas, pero que ya en las bases, digamos, se comenzaba a evaluar la posibilidad de darle otro uso económico, sobre todo orientado a la exportación, ¿no? Entonces, lo que está ocurriendo en el último año es que justamente a partir de iniciativas del gobierno federal, de la cual también toman parte las Fuerzas Armadas, es un proyecto que está siendo coordinado por el ejército mexicano, por ejemplo, el Tren Maya comenzó a hacer una instalación de un tendido ferroviario paralelo al turístico, estrictamente de carga, ¿no? Para mover mercancías, productos en general, hacia los principales puertos de la península de Yucatán. Y ahí es donde empezamos a entender justamente por qué había esta relación tan cercana entre el gobierno, las empresas porcícolas, las empresas avícolas, y en los últimos meses ya tenemos prácticamente una confirmación de que esos productos van a tener una orientación básicamente de exportación. Los principales mercados son Canadá, Estados Unidos, China, ¿no? El bloque asiático en general. Bueno, básicamente van a estar articulados con este tren de carga, por lo cual se sigue intensificando el apoyo a estas empresas, ¿no? Básicamente hay 3 compañías que son las que concentran la producción de carne industrial en Yucatán. En el caso de la carne de cerdo, el predominio es de una compañía que se llama Quequén, es una empresa que cotiza en la bolsa mexicana, es la mayor productora de carne de cerdo de México. Y en lo que hace a las avícolas hay 2 nombres, uno es Bachoco, que tiene también un alcance nacional o federal, está en todo el país, y una empresa un poco más pequeña, de corte regional, que se llama Crío, ¿no? Estas 3 empresas son las que hoy por hoy están efectuando la mayor depredación ambiental a partir de la producción intensiva de carne de pollo, carne de cerdo y por supuesto también huevos y otros derivados, ¿no? En el caso de las porcícolas quizás el efecto es un poco más visible porque las instalaciones suelen ser mucho más grandes y aparte tienen una longevidad mayor, ¿no? en el territorio. Eh, y al mismo tiempo son compañías de un tamaño también un poco mayor, dado que son, como decía en el caso de Quequén, una empresa que cotiza en la bolsa, ¿no? Que tiene otros números. Bueno, esta compañía en los últimos 15 años ha logrado instalar solo en el estado de Yucatán una estructura de alrededor de 800 megagranjas, ¿no? Que están distribuidas junto a comunidades mayas, como les decía. Estos datos fueron aportados hace algo más de un año por una organización que se llama Mercy for Animals, pero que nosotros, a partir de una investigación en el territorio que realizamos con Brighter Green, pudimos comprobar esta existencia y al mismo tiempo refutar las versiones emitidas por los gobiernos, tanto estatales como nacionales, que dicen que hay menos de 500 instalaciones en el estado. Bueno, nosotros hemos podido comprobar que son al menos 800, ¿no? Y para que se den una idea de qué hablamos como megagranjas, estamos hablando de espacios donde se integran hasta por lo menos 50.000 o 60.000 cerdos, ¿no? Los tamaños son realmente impactantes. Y un rasgo particular, como les decía, en el caso de las porcícolas, en el caso de esta compañía Quequén funciona básicamente no solo como la empresa que tiene la mayoría de las granjas en sí, ¿no? Que es titular de esas granjas, sino que ha instalado una red de proveedores en distintas partes del territorio, que son otras granjas que justamente crían y venden sus cerdos a Quequén, que aparte se ocupa de lo que sería el procesamiento de esa carne y la exportación en la mayoría de los casos, ¿no? Bueno, como les decía, bueno, esta estructura básicamente de Quequén y se lo llama parceros, se instalan siempre en zonas donde hay presencia del agua. La mayoría están enradicadas en un sitio Ramsar, acá en la zona de Yucatán, que se llama el Anillo de Cenotes. Quienes han estado por acá quizás han visitado en algún momento los cenotes, que son las reservas subterráneas de agua. La península prácticamente no tiene ríos, depende justamente de estas cavernas con aguas bajo tierra, ¿no? Y estas compañías se instalan justamente donde está distribuido este anillo de cenotes, esta principal reserva de agua dulce. Bueno, ahí es donde si uno coloca un mapa con la ubicación de las granjas, coincide perfectamente con estas reservas de agua que están comprobadas, ¿no? Y como les decía, se instalan también junto a las comunidades mayas, en donde además de efectuar situaciones de despojo de tierra, ¿no? Imponer todo tipo de violencias, también se abastecen de una mano de obra barata, ¿no? Que ese es otro aspecto. La precarización laboral es un elemento muy importante en el rasgo de cómo funciona justamente la estructura de la producción intensiva acá en Yucatán. Ahora bien, por supuesto, son las comunidades indígenas las primeras que han expuesto a la situación de contaminación y de impacto que generan estos, pero también hay datos de autoridades ambientales en México que reconocen justamente lo que ha generado este modelo en los últimos 20 años, sobre todo en esta zona, ¿no? El primer rasgo que reconocen las autoridades es la deforestación, ¿no? O sea, la instalación de estas megafactorías implica arrasar con hectáreas y hectáreas de selva, ¿no? Hay zonas como Quinchil, que yo les mencionaba, es donde hicimos una laguna negra, donde básicamente la misma autoridad ambiental del gobierno mexicano reconoce que ya se ha arrasado el 80% de la selva baja, solo en ese municipio. Pero al mismo tiempo hay otros monitoreos, hay otros informes gubernamentales que reconocen también el impacto sobre las fuentes de agua, sobre todo en estas zonas indígenas cercanas a Mérida, a la capital, donde, bueno, en los últimos 2 años se han encontrado contaminación con nitrógeno y con fósforo, que es básicamente proveniente de las excretas de los cerdos. Se han encontrado altas concentraciones de nitratos, de zinc, de metales pesados, en muchos casos derivados de los medicamentos, de los antibióticos que se le aplican a los cerdos, que los cerdos después eliminan a través justamente de sus excretas, y esto va a parar al manto acuífero, ¿no? A lo que sería el tema del sistema de cenotes justamente en el anillo que les comentaba, ¿no? Bueno, la situación en ese caso no solo es agravada en tanto el agua no se puede consumir en la mayoría de las comunidades, sino que aparte no existe ningún tipo de medida tomado tanto por las autoridades ambientales nacionales como las locales, las estatales, ¿no? Para mitigar justamente algo que la misma evidencia de los organismos de control está arrojando, que es el perjuicio que existe sobre el agua, ¿no? A estos elementos, lo ambiental, ¿no? Que les comentaba y demás, se le tiene que añadir, por supuesto, la manera en la que los estados, los gobiernos han respaldado este modelo, inclusive a través del uso de la fuerza, a través de la coerción, ¿no? O sea, en situaciones donde ha habido de repente una resistencia hasta física, ¿no? A la instalación de estas empresas, el gobierno del estado de Yucatán no ha dudado en utilizar a la policía o a fuerzas parapoliciales justamente para tratar de reducir, ¿no? la queja social. Y otro elemento que se ha dado en los últimos, sobre todo 5 años, es la criminalización de la resistencia indígena. Esto es la persecución de de aquellas personas a las cuales las autoridades políticas judiciales, por ejemplo, detectan como lideresas o líderes justamente de los movimientos sociales de oposición a las megagranjas, y lo que se hace básicamente es iniciar una persecución, en algunos casos mediante la represión directa, las amenazas, o después a través de procesos judiciales siempre basados en irregularidades, ¿no? En el caso de la investigación que hicimos en Brighter Green hace más de un año, nosotros dimos cuenta de un caso justamente en Quinchil, ¿no? Donde en el 2013 pues yo lo tengo acá anotado, en junio de 2013, la empresa Quequén, la que les venía mencionando, hizo un despojo ilegal de 30 hectáreas de un terreno, de una serie de terrenos pertenecientes a una familia ancestral de esa zona, justamente una familia de campesinos, de apicultores, que es una de las actividades que más se realiza en esta región, ¿no? La apicultura maya. Bueno, ese terreno esa propiedad se llama Cantucún, básicamente, y lo que ocurrió en Cantucún es que la empresa se apropia de 30 hectáreas, ¿no? Para hacer una ampliación de la megagranja que ya tenía operativa ahí, y la familia justamente inicia una resistencia, ¿no? Con alambradas y demás, y lo que ocurre es que la empresa, con el respaldo del Estado, ¿no? Ocurre un despliegue de fuerzas especiales, ¿no? O sea, en particular se utilizó un grupo que se llama el Grupo Roca, que es un grupo entrenado básicamente por comandos israelíes, por el SWAT estadounidense, por la policía francesa, que iniciaron básicamente una cacería de la familia, de los integrantes, ¿no? Que fueron no solo golpeados, sino también amenazados a través de la misma selva, ¿no? Para que cesen con este reclamo de la tierra propia, ¿no? Ese proceso sigue abierto hasta hoy y ese despojo está vigente, ¿no? Lo cual en definitiva también demuestra esto, ¿no? Que hay una continuidad de las causas que se abren y de las persecuciones que sufren las comunidades indígenas, ¿no? También nosotros dimos cuenta de la situación en Sitilpech, otra comunidad que está a poco más de una hora de Mérida. En ese lugar funciona una megagranja de Quequén. En febrero de 2023, básicamente las vecinas y los vecinos habían instalado un campamento, ¿no? A las afueras de esa megagranja, junto a una carretera, ¿no? En protesta, básicamente para visualizar, para hacer llegar también a los medios de comunicación el reclamo de la comunidad. Bueno, ese campamento comunitario fue atacado básicamente por fuerzas policiales durante la madrugada del 18 de febrero de 2023. Nosotros en nuestra investigación, que la está compartiendo Isis ahí en el grupo, muchas gracias, tenemos el testimonio de las personas que fueron golpeadas esa noche, la mayoría mujeres y niños, mujeres e infancias. Muy difícil que nos pudiesen relatar sin caer en el llanto, ¿no? Y ese recuerdo terrible de lo que ocurrió. Y las mujeres contándonos con una claridad absoluta, ¿no? De que sabían que hubo una inteligencia por parte de la Fuerza de Seguridad del Estado de Yucatán para saber que esa noche en particular no iban a encontrarse los hombres en el campamento, sino que solamente iban a estar las mujeres y los niños. Y básicamente hubo un bloqueo de las calles cercanas, hubo un despliegue de uniformados ocultos en las selvas, una zona selvática, ¿no? Y también, no solo golpearon a las personas y destruyeron el campamento, sino a quienes lograron de alguna manera llegar a los árboles, llegar a la vegetación, se encontraron con que estaba la policía oculta ahí y también fueron golpeados. Bueno, fue realmente bestial. Y lo particular es que luego de que todo eso ocurre, luego de que sucede el procedimiento, básicamente lo primero que ingresa a la granja es un camión con alimentos para los cerdos. Hicieron toda esa represión básicamente para que un camión pudiese ingresar a alimentar a los cerdos de la granja. Bueno, esta es una de las tantas situaciones. Por supuesto, está la cuestión de la judicialización. No me quiero olvidar de ese detalle, porque no solo pasó esta represión en Sitilpech, sino que otra vez, ¿no? Hubo una identificación de cuáles eran las personas que estaban liderando la resistencia y se les inició un proceso legal por presunto bloqueo a una carretera. Ese proceso legal exigía la prisión preventiva de las personas acusadas y se les impuso una condena de hasta 5 años de prisión efectiva, que no se llevó a cabo porque hubo un acuerdo, en donde se estableció que estas personas no iban a cumplir con esta condena efectiva solo si omitían su reclamo contra la granja. Y eso fue lo que pasó, ¿no? O sea, las personas dejaron de quejarse de la granja y automáticamente ese proceso judicial quedó en suspenso, porque lo que se les informó es que si en algún momento ellos eran ubicados cerca de esas granjas, nuevamente de esa granja, ¿no? O iniciaban algún tipo de protesta social, ese proceso se iba a reabrir. Y así continúa hasta hoy, ¿no? Y de lo que estamos hablando es de comunidades indígenas donde existe mucha necesidad económica, de mucha pobreza, de muy escasos recursos, donde las fuentes laborales escasean, ¿no? O sea, donde es un caldo de cultivo para que estas compañías, para que la violencia del Estado se pueda volver, digamos, un manejo sin ningún tipo de control, una violencia desmedida sin tipo de freno, ¿no? Porque cuando te violenta el Estado, ¿a quién reclamas? ¿A dónde llega tu poder? Y esa es un poco la dificultad. Estas personas en Sitilpech hoy sobreviven con esta posibilidad de repente poder ir presas, ¿no? A partir de una noche donde la represión la llevó a cabo el Estado por una acción que ni siquiera era, bajo ningún punto de vista, ¿no es cierto?, ilegal, y era en defensa de su territorio, de sus fuentes de agua y demás. Otro caso, y con ese quiero cerrar el capítulo porcícolas, es el caso de Santa María Chi. Es una comunidad maya también que está a poco menos de media hora de la ciudad de Mérida. En ese caso es muy valioso porque la comunidad de Santa María Chi se movilizó y está a un paso de lograr básicamente el desmantelamiento total de la megagranja, ¿no? O sea, este es un proceso que lleva más de 2 años, donde han actuado también abogados y organizaciones de la sociedad civil para defender a la comunidad, y se ha logrado finalmente de que la justicia disponga el desmantelamiento de la granja, que se tiene que llevar a cabo antes del próximo 30 de abril. Si esto se hace realmente efectivo, que es lo que estamos esperando, va a ser la primera vez que una megagranja de cerdos activa cierra de manera definitiva en Yucatán. Pero mientras tanto, en ese proceso, en esos 2 años que ha llevado, y poquito más, la lucha en Santa María Chi, la compañía acusó a Wilber Náhuatl, que es el alcalde de Santa María Chi y una de las personas que ha liderado justamente la resistencia popular en esa comunidad contra la granja, acusó básicamente de manera injusta de secuestro, de daño a la propiedad, ¿no? Justamente por estar al frente de este movimiento popular, este movimiento indígena justamente, ¿no? Y se le inició un proceso judicial que sigue hasta hoy. Aparentemente esto se debería cerrar en las próximas semanas sin ningún tipo de complicaciones para Wilber Náhuatl, pero bueno, se lo acusó de secuestro, de daño a la propiedad, y una acusación de secuestro en México es muy grave justamente, y también se penaliza con una prisión, con una condena, con una prisión efectiva, ¿no? Entonces, esa ha sido un poco la manera en la que la empresa ha tratado de socavar justamente la resistencia en esa comunidad, que afortunadamente ha logrado mantenerse de pie con mucha unidad, y está a escasos días de lograr un hito, ¿no? Un evento histórico como sería cerrar esta mega granja. Eso es en el caso de los cerdos. En la cuestión de las avícolas, crío y bachoco, como les decía, básicamente operan de la misma manera, ¿no? Depredando el agua, arrasando la selva. Son empresas un poco más pequeñas, ¿no? En el caso de bachoco se reconocen alrededor de 90 granjas, ¿no? De pollos específicamente. En el caso de crío son 13 granjas, o sea, no estamos hablando de las 800, como es el caso de Quequén y sus socios, pero sí es un modelo que está escalando, ¿no? O sea, todos los años se están abriendo nuevas megagranjas de pollos, y también en la misma zona, ¿no? En el anillo de cenotes, junto a las fuentes de agua, cerca de las comunidades, para abastecerse también de mano de obra barata, ¿no? Arrasan la selva, contaminan el agua, como les decía, y afectan, por supuesto, ¿no? El tema de la milpa, la apicultura, que son las actividades económicas ancestrales, históricas más importantes de las familias mayas en el territorio de Yucatán. Un aspecto diferente, digamos, que estamos encontrando, que hemos ido constatando sobre todo en el último año. Yo hago mucha labor de campo con las comunidades y trabajamos muy vinculados con las personas en el territorio. Es que hemos detectado que tanto Crío como Bachoco han iniciado un proceso de abrir tiraderos ilegales de excrementos en la selva, básicamente, ¿no? Excrementos y otros residuos. Lo que hacen es, se meten, incursionan de manera ilegal en terrenos dentro del ambiente selvático justamente, efectúan desmontes con maquinarias propias, y ahí comienzan a vertir todos los excrementos que generan sus megagranjas, ¿no? Estamos hablando de hectáreas, de tiraderos de 5, 7, 8 hectáreas más o menos, ocultos en la selva. Nosotros trabajamos mucho con drones y por eso los hemos ubicado. Y tan solo en el último año nosotros detectamos 8 tiraderos ilegales, ¿no? En el medio del monte. Esto es también muy cerca de Quinchil, ¿no? Esto estamos hablando a casi una hora de Mérida, no muy lejos de la capital. Bueno, estos tiraderos, por supuesto, perjudican la vida silvestre, las fuentes de agua potable, porque esas excretas luego pasan, por supuesto, al subsuelo, como les decía, las actividades económicas ancestrales, ¿no? Hay una proliferación de moscas, bueno, la fauna silvestre se aleja, ¿no? Los animales no quieren tomar el agua, realmente es un descalabro enorme que inició en el último año y del cual todavía no tenemos precisiones de hasta dónde va a llegar el impacto. Por supuesto, hemos efectuado publicaciones periodísticas, hay causas judiciales abiertas por parte de las comunidades indígenas y demás, y hasta ahora la posición de las autoridades estatales y del gobierno de México a nivel federal ha sido prácticamente nula intervención, o nos ha pasado que de repente han ido a clausurar lugares que no eran los que nosotros habíamos georreferenciado, ¿no? O sea, publican comunicados con supuestas clausuras de estos lugares y encontramos que no son ninguno de los espacios que nosotros hemos mapeado inclusive, ¿no? Le hemos entregado a las autoridades los mapas con la detección, los espacios, las fotografías y los videos de dónde están justamente estos tiraderos y no ha habido una sola respuesta positiva en ese sentido en favor de las comunidades indígenas mayas que otra vez están pagando el precio de este desastre ambiental, ¿no? Bueno, para cerrar, perdón si me he extendido mucho, como les decía al principio, esto es inseparable del componente político. Acá básicamente las compañías están entrelazadas con los poderes políticos, sobre todo los poderes políticos del Estado. Esto va más allá de una gestión de gobierno, no es un tema partidista. Han negociado y se han vinculado económicamente con todas las gestiones de gobierno, por lo menos en los últimos 20 años que yo tengo la referencia. Seguramente esto es más antiguo inclusive, ¿no? Y por eso se da esta sociedad para criminalizar a las comunidades indígenas, para avanzar con la contaminación de los territorios. Es inseparable un actor del otro, ¿no es cierto? Y aquí lo que encontramos también es que hay pruebas contundentes, ¿no? Yo lo que no les dije de las granjas de cerdos es que de las 800 que hay en funcionamiento, alrededor del 90% está operando sin ningún tipo de permiso ambiental. Y eso es exclusivamente responsabilidad de esa autoridad en el sentido que también, ¿no? Ha habido publicaciones, reclamos y demás, dando cuenta justamente de estos permisos que no existen y aún así las autoridades no toman ningún tipo de medida. En Yucatán, en particular, los gobiernos locales no ocultan nunca los proyectos que tienen en común, ¿no? Con las mismas empresas, programas asistencialistas, becas, distintas acciones de mecenazgo, ¿no? Acciones sociales compartidas, organizan maratones donde aparece obviamente desde el gobernador hasta el gerente de la compañía de turno, ¿no? Y básicamente es el mismo Estado, el gobierno del Estado, el que presenta a estas empresas como socialmente responsables, ¿no? Entonces, en Yucatán es muy común ver a los funcionarios del momento haciendo una publicidad, yo no diría encubierta, sino bastante explícita, de Quequén, de Bachoco y de Crío, y de que, por qué es beneficioso que estas empresas continúen operando en el territorio más allá del desastre que están llevando a cabo. Esa es la realidad, esa es la situación, la perspectiva es muy preocupante, es dramática, pero nos vemos a la obligación de seguir resistiendo y tratando de acompañar justamente a las comunidades en estos momentos tan difíciles de lucha, de resistencia, una resistencia que es histórica. Este territorio, estas comunidades mayas siempre han hecho valer sus derechos, han hecho básicamente de su historia una lucha permanente, ¿no? Y bueno, confiamos en que eso en algún momento incline para mejor la balanza. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Patricia. So we're going to keep the questions for the end for all the speakers at the same time, as I said. So now we're going to hear from Isis, who is going to speak about the case of Colombia. I read her bio earlier, but I didn't. I was a bit confused about who was doing what when, so I'm going to go ahead and read it again. So Isis is an ecofeminist with 15 years of experience in the environmental nonprofit sector globally, actively participating in key global environmental policy spaces and social movements, working closely with civil society, and engaging in networks that advocate for social and climate justice, including issues such as women's rights, community-based conservation, and sustainable food systems, among others. Since 2023, she is a consultant for Brighter Green, a think tank that focuses on the intersections of sustainability, environmentalism, and social equity, aiming to raise awareness and encouraging policy action on critical issues such as climate change. The globalization of factory farming, food systems, and animal welfare, often with an emphasis on the global south. All right, thank you so much, Isis.
Okay, thank you, Nasim, and thank you to the other speakers. I have a presentation. Chema, I don't know if you're able to put it on screen. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So you've seen already cases in Brazil and in Mexico. So now I'm going to report back on what our partners did here in Colombia. Next one, please. So we partner with two main media outlets. One was Revista Raya magazine. They cover a lot of political issues. The other is El Turbión. They're more like alternative media platform. Next one, Chema, please. Next slide. Okay, so for Revista Raya, also because of their specific scope on politics, they focused on the nexus between deforestation, cattle ranching, and paramilitary. So basically, what everybody knows, but they reported on it, they spelled it out, and is how embedded is paramilitarism in the business of cattle ranching in Colombia. And a lot of these activities are held in selvatic areas, like in jungle areas, such as in the Amazon or other areas in the country which are highly forested. So the region that you're looking at, the highlighted region on the map, this is Colombia. This is the map of Colombia, and this is the Guaviare region, which is north of the Amazon, and it has had like a long history of conflict. As you know, Colombia has had over 60 years of violent conflict. So the history says that a lot of people displaced from the violence came to this Salvatic area. But because there was a journalist that said at some point on the radio that there was plenty of land available. So everyone came here. They were just dropped with like food for one day and let them live there. Then the violent conflict got more acute from 1997 to 2007. A lot of people had to leave their lands. The paramilitaries and the narcos took over, and they took the opportunity and grabbed the lands. They encroached on indigenous land. This used to be the land for the Nucac communities. The Nucac communities is the last nomadic tribe in Colombia. Of course, they can't be nomadic anymore. Actually, they have been totally, dispossessed, impoverished, and they are on the verge of extinction. So when the paramilitaries took over the land, there were very high rates of deforestation. In the recent years, the highest rates of deforestation in the country were specific from the Guaviare region, up to 12.3%. And also the highest rates of greenhouse gas emissions came from this province too. And this was because they wanted to introduce more cattle, which in turn continued to impact the already impacted livelihoods of the Nucac communities, especially their health. What happened was that, their health and their livelihoods, as I said, they started fencing, like the new owners of the land that encroached the land, started fencing these territories. So the communities were deprived from fishing, from hunting, from gathering, and actually started to threat their food security. After the peace process that was in 2016, the number of cattle doubled or more than doubled in the Guaviare region. 284,000 animals were introduced, which of course aggravated the deforestation biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emission, and water source depletion situation. This caused further displacement of the indigenous peoples and actually brought other social problems like sexual abuse for Nukak girls. Next one, Chema, please. Next slide, please. The other investigation, like all these sources, we're sharing with you on the chat box. So if you want to have a look, so these are in Spanish, and then the other ones you'll find them in English. There are videos as well, so you can get to watch them. So the next collaboration we did with the Revista Raya was about livestock farming, destroying ecosystems, and the issue of money laundering. This was looking at a specific cattle rancher, very famous, called the Totoariza in a region called Santander. He had been arrested a couple of times, but mysteriously his files ended up disappearing and nothing really happened. And he continued to do his business with the guise of buffalo racing. His company, Agropecuaria El Buffalo, has been investigated, and there are proofs, there's evidence that through this company they move like huge amounts of money, and they also have questionable deals, including fictitious exports, alteration of registers of record of exporting meat and live animals abroad. The big problem with buffaloes is buffaloes were introduced back in the 60s to this region, especially to help in the harvesting of palm fruits. But they saw there was big business also in livestock farming in farming buffaloes. But the buffaloes caused like an enormous effect on the ecosystems. The region's flora and fauna started to be depleted. There was lots of pollution. They disrupted the ecosystems. They affected the soils and the watersheds. And this in turn jeopardized many different species, such as the manatees. So the manatees are now a species on the verge of extinction. One thing that the people that the Nukak have been also denouncing is how invasive these buffaloes are. So they have, I mean, they also, it's not like the fault of the buffalo, but of course of the people who are introducing them for business. And they are the comparison is that these are invasive species that are destroying a lot of the life and the resources that the Nukak depend on. And they make the comparison with the case of the hippos. I don't know if many of you are familiar, but there is like a big issue here in Colombia with hippopotamuses that, or I don't know if you say that in English, but during the Pablo Escobar years in the 1980s, he had his own zoo, and at this zoo they had the hippopotamuses. And when it was finished and the state confiscated the farm, these animals were let loose and they started breeding in the Magdalena River. And at some point there were so many hippopotamuses, and they are dangerous animals. They attack people and they eat everything they find. So they totally altered the ecosystem and the biodiversity around the areas where they were living. So the local peoples in Santander, where they raise these buffaloes, they make this comparison on how harmful is the introduction of thousands of buffaloes to their lands. Next slide, please. The next cases, so this is the collaboration we did with El Turbión. As I said before, in the chat box, we copied the different links for the different articles. And this one looks at a different region. It's also north of the Amazon in the Vichada and Meta provinces. And this is regarding the dispossession of the Sicuanis and other indigenous groups. that had inhabited those territories for ages, forever. Today, only 30% of the inhabitants in these provinces are indigenous, and mostly from the Sicuani indigenous groups. But again, the Sicuani are totally impoverished. They have lost a lot of their cultures and tradition. The Muco River, which is the one they depended on for fishing, is now totally polluted because these lands have also been illegally appropriated by private people, and many times also associated to paramilitaries and narco traffic. And because the lack of titles, of legal titles for the Sicuani indigenous peoples, they haven't had like a legal tool to defend those territories, despite the fact that the state in its constitution recognizes that there are indigenous resguardos or indigenous territories where they are allowed to stay. There has been a legal battle for so long, but still nothing is decided. But in this series of articles, you will delve into the nitty-gritty of this case, which has also like the presence of paramilitaries and has open way for foreigners like the Mennonites to appropriate the lands, and not to appropriate just a little bit of land, but like huge tracts of land. And what they do is mainly converted into monocultures or introduce industrialized, mechanized agriculture. And one of these activities is the industrial pork production. The biggest company in Colombia is called Aliar Facenda, and they have devastated ecosystems, including wetlands, savannas, forests, and severely affected the Muco River, as I said, one of the watersheds that the Sicuani used to depend on. Actually, a study that was carried out recently showed like water samples showed figures that exceeded 1,500 times the allowed limit for fecal coliforms. So the water can be used, and it's actually evidence of how bad the farms are harming the river, the Muco River, and hence how it is harming the livelihoods and the existence of the Sicuani people. There's actually a history of persecution to the Sicuani. Back in the 1940s, there was something called jaramilladas, which was kind of hunting groups that would go chasing indigenous peoples and then occupy the lands for different activities like oil or livestock, and more recently using those lands for mega farms. There's also another component, and it's also what El Turbión investigated, and it was the association with Víctor Carranza. In Colombia, Víctor Carranza is a big name because he's an emerald czar, one of the richest men in Colombia, but also that has been associated to the paramilitary and narco traffic. So next one, please. So this series of articles, the first one focused, I mean, that was like the whole framework. And the first article focuses more on how the pork mega farms eat away life in Meta, in this region specifically, and how it shows how there was so much biodiversity, how much abundance, and the connection to the Sicuanis indigenous peoples, the ancient inhabitants of these areas, how they took care of those resources, but how this is all disrupted when these industrial agriculture activities started expanding. Aliar Facenda is a pioneer in growing soybeans and corn in the Orinoquia region to produce animal feed for pigs in these mega farms. They started operations in 2007, and they grew exponentially. They transformed that into 40,000 hectares of land into a pantry that fed 134,000 pigs. By 2025, they claim to have 880 pigs and produce 100 million kilos of meat per year. So imagine. Something that is important to highlight is that different governments have openly backed the economic activity of Aliar Fazenda, and it has even been praised by the economic journals on how good the business it is for the country with this company. So Aliar Fazenda has prevented people from enjoying the area. People have been losing their subsistence economy. They cannot fish, they cannot grow crops because they don't have clean water. And they have turned what was biodiverse rich savannas into soybean, corn, and deserts. Like in Patricio's case, the former workers in the facilities, they denounced that daily they can have 30 to 50 newborn dead pigs, which they throw outside the facilities. They just open a hole and they just leave them there, and they don't let anyone get in, any auditing or anything whatsoever to, yeah, to give a testimony of what is going on there. Next one, please. So the next article is specific on how Carranza's dead hand help the Mennonites to take over the land. So the land dispossession, the violence, and the ecocide that has marked the history of the Sicuani people since the 40s. The Mennonites could purchase these lands at a very cheap and openly from these Carranza people. Carranza, yeah, I would say because he's like a whole conglomerate, no? So they purchased very cheap thousands of hectares, and they just turn it into almost 30,000 hectares of mechanized agriculture, eh, affecting the Sicuani people, affecting them so much. And this is about the next article. Can we look at the next one, please? It was so bad that because of that, because the Sicuani didn't have recognition of their lands, that they were forced to move. The people in Barrulia, another community, they had like 58,000 hectares to inhabit, to live their lives. And then all of a sudden, because of the purchase of these Mennonites and the encroaching of these activities, they had to be moved. They were evicted, illegally evicted, and they were moved to a sports center in a township. It's like stripping them off of all their culture and their livelihoods, and away from any nature, from their medicinal plants. They can no longer use their medicinal plants. So a lot of them have ended up being sick, and even I think 8 of them have died since they arrived to this sports facility. They have been there for over a year, and so far it doesn't seem to be a lot of hope for that, but they remain hopeful. The public prosecutor's office is pressing charges against 12 members of the Mennonites for deforestation, environmental damage, illegal exploitation of renewable natural resources, and accelerated expansion of agricultural activities into the vicinity of streams and conservation areas. And yes, and in the links you can have a look at the full stories. These from El Turbión are both in English and Spanish, and you can find them through the links. So I think that's it for me. Giving it back to Nassim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isis, and thank you to all the speakers. Before we move to Q&A, I also want to thank Lewis, our interpreter, because it's a lot of work. First of all, he's doing 2 directions. Often interpreters will do just one, and he's taking care of a big amount of time with no breaks. So he's really allowing us to be, different parts of the world. We're talking about Colombia, Brazil, Mexico. We're in the US. We have people joining from yet other countries. And so that's really an amazing thing. And so thank you to the speakers, and also thank you to Lewis, the interpreter. So for the Q&A, we can just go ahead and write the questions in the chat. And I'll read them. If the speakers feel like also checking that out and writing something in there, that's fine. But if we do it orally, everybody can follow more easily. So feel free to write your questions in English or in Spanish in the chat, and we have some time to take. We have some time to take a few. Anybody have any questions? Let's see. So Elena, hi Elena. I didn't see you at the beginning. So Elena is asking if there's anything we can do to help. I think that's a question that really all three should answer, because it might be different. You have different focuses. You're looking at different countries. Yeah. So if anyone wants to start, you can go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, you got the time difference wrong. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, we're going to post this online. I can't guarantee when, but we will do it. So you'll get that. And then also take a look in the chat, because we've linked a lot of articles and videos that go deeper into what the speakers covered today. So you can check that out as well. But in terms of, I guess what can the average activist / consumer do about these issues? Whoever would like to start can go ahead.
Maybe I can start quickly. So, well, I think there's a lot people can do. I think disseminating this kind of information, I think we need to create awareness among each other. Not a lot of people know about what this industrial production model brings. So I think it's very important to pass on the message that it's not just a situation, like an isolated situation somewhere, but it is actually a systemic situation that it's actually expanding. And since if people are more aware of that, they could definitely start to understand like how important are your choices, your own diets, for example. It's not that you have to become a vegan, but of course there's so much you can do understanding where your food comes from and what impact is having to forests, to people, to to water, and especially also holding governments accountable as well, no? Because you I mean, there's not a lot of control or legislation on these issues. And then the global south is, well, it always has been the pantry of many global north countries. But there needs to be more control from the authorities, from the governments, on how these activities are being held. They do need to take into account environmental and human rights safeguards, and reinforce to take care of their own citizens. I don't know, Poliana?
Yeah, I agree. It's always difficult to say how we can change this. But besides the government held accountability for this, seeing the experiences we have with other investigations on the animal sector that have like an interesting impact, most of the investigations were able to identify who is profiting from these irregularities. And the companies don't like to be named negatively in the internet or name and shaming. So I'm a journalist, so I have like a perspective of a journalist, but looking from the other side, from the activist side, I think these actions of naming and shaming and finding new connections of these irregularities, for example, the companies, the banks that are behind these big companies that are investing on them. So this used to have like an impact. Okay, so let's talk about the banks behind the funds, the companies in the US that are making possible for JBS or for other huge companies in Brazil, in Colombia, and in Mexico to continue to doing this kind of social and environmental violation. So yeah, I think it would be great if you could keep doing this kind of spreading the information and also like annoying the companies online. I think that it's how we can do like a person, because we have low power to change, but together, of course, we are stronger. And yes, we are in a very delicate political moment in the US, in Brazil. We have the far right all around the continent, and they don't like this this environmental issues. I mean, this kind of issues they do not address. They deny the climate change. So yeah, we should all vote better and of course talk with our colleagues and friends and our neighbors to make awareness about their impacts when they are like voting for someone on the next election.
Patricio.
Bueno, en mi caso quería comentar, a ver, una situación que se da muy aquí es esta idea de decir, bueno, el problema es que consumen mucha carne de cerdo. Los mayas comen mucho cerdo, ¿no? Como si fuese que ese es el aspecto que genera megafactorías de 50, 60 mil animales, ¿no? Básicamente el tema acá es el modelo exportador. Por ende, es importantísimo lograr que la comunidad internacional tome conciencia de qué es lo que está comprando, qué es lo que se está consumiendo y qué es lo que eso está generando en los territorios y en las comunidades ancestrales. Eso para mí es fundamental, ¿no? Insisto, porque acá muchas veces la misma política instala esto, ¿no? De, bueno, pero a los mayas les encanta comer cerdo. O sea, tenemos 800 megafactorías con millones de cerdos. Es una locura, ¿no? Entonces, ese es un punto. La cuestión de la difusión, coincido plenamente, es importantísima. Ayer yo me reuní con una persona de Ciudad de México que está investigando el caso de Santa María Chi, este que comentaba que se va a cerrar la granja a fines de abril, y me preguntaba justamente eso, cómo se había logrado tanta difusión siendo que es una comunidad que no llega a los 500 habitantes. O sea, no es uno de los pueblos más grandes que tiene megagranjas, pero sí uno de los que tiene una de las megagranjas de mayor tamaño y con una afectación directa, ¿no? O sea, la megagranja está, se levanta, para que se den una idea, a 10 metros de la última calle del pueblo, ¿no? Y ese caso llegó hasta las autoridades, o sea, fue expuesta en conferencia de prensa por el expresidente Andrés Manuel López Obrador, etcétera. O sea, la presión fue tal y la difusión fue tan importante que en Ciudad de México tuvieron que atender este tema, ¿no? Entonces, divulgar es importantísimo. Y yo siento que en este caso en particular en México el aparato político en general ha logrado imponer cierto hermetismo a estas cuestiones que no se conocen fuera de México, ¿no? Sobre todo se transmite la idea de que estamos en gestiones progresistas de respeto de los derechos humanos. Bueno, derechos indígenas parece que no les importan demasiado, porque se sigue viviendo igual. Entonces hay que romper eso justamente y dejar afuera esta retórica de creer de que aquí todo está bien, cuando la realidad es que los mismos de siempre, los indígenas, los pobres, los excluidos, las mayorías, están siendo violentadas permanentemente y de forma sistemática. Creo que la presión internacional en ese sentido, a través de la difusión y también de la conciencia de lo que se consume, son fundamentales para romper este cerco que se ha impuesto acá, insisto, con la idea de que todo está correcto y vamos hacia un futuro mejor, cuando la realidad muestra absolutamente lo contrario.
So there are a few questions. I've also received a couple direct messages. So I'm going to see what makes sense to ask first or later. So I'll start with this one from Jenny. So don't you think that nothing will change whilst the demand exists for cheap meat? I believe the world does have to move towards veganism in order to save it. Those of us who live in countries where it is easy to be vegan should be vegan, or at least 80 or 90% plant-based. So as the organizer of this webinar series, and also, we went to COP30 and so on, I wanted to say, I think that the relevance of us doing this, of coming together across countries, is because we live in a global economy. And as Pollyanna pointed out, Brazil exports much of its beef. So the issues that we're talking about, they're not isolated. It's not just sort of a curiosity for people around the world to think like, oh, this is happening in Colombia. Rather, all of these things are happening in a global economy. And also, Chem and I tomorrow are going to talk about the the cultural connections as well, not only the economic ones, but the history and culture of cattle ranching and beef consumption in the Americas as a whole. Again, showing that what's happening in different countries is ultimately connected. So I do think that that's something to keep in mind, that ultimately it is about what can we, we're already connected, so how can we really act on that connection? But as to the more specific aspects of your question, I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that, any comments about that.
Well, I would add, of course, like I think the times that we are living and what we are seeing with climate change, there is like no question about the fact that we definitely need to shift our diets toward more plant-based diets and reducing the intake of meat. Now, I think that's a very complex issue because to some people it is very personal. But what we could do is to understand that a model that is depriving the animals from living their lives, from having, like stripping those animals from having a relationship to nature the way they have done forever, is one of the things that need to be considered, no? So, and like there has been like a relationship of human and animals for so long, where there has been, like a reciprocity sort of relation. The fact is that with such an industrial model, it is totally broken, and that's when humans begin to exploit the non-human animals, no? Because whether it is, we're talking now about pigs, but it could also be chickens, but you could also talk about salmon, but you could also talk even about octopus, that they are now building farms for farming octopus. So it's like a it's like a systemic thing, as I said before. And I saw the question about animal welfare. So yes, or in all the articles we try to have that angle for animal welfare. It's I mean, it is so horrible. Like in the video, in the documentary that Patricio and his partner made, the one that won the contest for Yale 360 environment, they depict precisely how bad are the conditions of these animals. I know that in the case of Yucatan, and not just in the case of Yucatan, but these farms are usually very secretive and they don't want their workers to even have a phone inside. So what happens inside is very out of our eyes, although we know what happens. No, there's a lot of cruelty going on. As I said with the Colombia case, like newborn uh, pigs are dying the whole time, and the ones that are confined, these animals, they don't see the sunlight. They don't, many of them, or even chickens, they don't get to touch the ground. They don't get to be in touch with the, I don't know, grass. So on that sense, it's also pretty bad. I mean, we are definitely committing a lot of violations against the rights of nature and the rights of animals.
All right. So, a question from Linda. Mennonites like to think of themselves as a peaceful, nonviolent religious group. The group you mentioned in Colombia, does it consist of settlers from the United States, or are these Mennonites that have lived in Colombia since the original immigration of Mennonites from Europe?
Well, I don't know because the journalists they are not here, the ones who did the work here in Colombia. I work with them within the coordination of the project. But yeah, I don't know. Those are very difficult. Those are very difficult questions, specifically because of the context, no? When you have been living in a country with such a history of violence, you usually are very scared of doing certain things that in other countries would be very normal, no? In some places, you don't dare just to bring up your ideas to anyone because you don't know if the person sitting next to you is a paramilitary or is from the guerrillas. So there's a lot of nuance there, and yeah, unless you've lived in such a context, you wouldn't really know how complex is still even for the choices, no, for the choices that you make for you in such difficult conditions. You need to think twice, and many times it's your decisions are based on survival.
Patricio, I wanted to ask if you'd also like to comment on that question about the Mennonites.
Sí, perdón, yo quería hacer un comentario sobre los menonitas, tratando de hacer una aclaración siempre porque es muy sencillo caer quizás dentro de las redes de la xenofobia en algún aspecto, ¿no? Entonces es importante hacer esa aclaración. Pero sí, la situación con las menonitas, con las comunidades menonitas en la península de Yucatán es realmente dramática. Vienen promoviendo básicamente una deforestación bestial en casi todo el territorio, reemplazando los ecosistemas selváticos por producción intensiva y extensiva de commodities, de cultivos industriales como la soya, por ejemplo, como también el maíz, transgénicos, más allá de que México niega la existencia de estos cultivos transgénicos. Yo los he comprobado en el territorio, los he visto. El uso indiscriminado de agrotóxicos, por ejemplo. Y en los últimos, diría, 4 o 5 años, ya han habido detenciones de ciudadanos de la comunidad menonita justamente ligados al crimen organizado, ligados al narcotráfico. Por ende, la situación es muy difícil y muy compleja dentro de la cosmovisión menonita, por lo menos de los grupos que se han instalado aquí. Digo, lo comento porque es muy común. Nosotros de alguna manera u otra nos vinculamos, las comunidades indígenas están en tensión justamente con varios de estos grupos menonitas. La cosmovisión es que el territorio está para ser utilizado y que básicamente la tierra hay que destinarla sí o sí a la producción intensiva y extensiva agrícola y hay que usar los recursos de agua existentes y que Dios en algún momento va a proveer, ¿no? Cuando todo esto se agote. Y un detalle también importante en ese caso es que ha habido una estimulación por parte de los gobiernos mexicanos de la instalación de la erradicación de estas comunidades menonitas aquí. Se les ha dado facilidades. Los menonitas en esta zona de México, bueno, México en general funcionan casi como un estado paralelo, tienen sus propias escuelas, no tienen la obligación de hablar el idioma, no son parte del servicio militar ni pueden ser convocados a ningún tipo de esas actividades, por ende funcionan como un estado dentro del estado, ¿no? Durante el gobierno de López Obrador se acuñó una moneda especial, me hubiese gustado tener la imagen, porque debo tener la fotografía en algún lugar de mi laptop, una moneda conmemorativa de los años que lleva la comunidad menonita instalada en México, ¿no? Como un festejo y hay muchos analistas, sobre todo analistas mayas, expertos mayas, ¿no? Filósofos y demás, que no dudan en afirmar que la erradicación, la expansión de las comunidades menonitas en la península de Yucatán forma parte de un plan de blanqueamiento, de un plan de racial, básicamente, para modificar la raíz indígena de la península, para, en definitiva, instalar una población blanca, ¿no? Entonces, dentro de esa estructura también, donde el racismo juega un papel fundamental, que es algo que quizá a mí se me escapó en lo que comentaba, ¿no? Esto, ¿no? La- la- la división racial, ¿no es cierto? La persecución y demás que sufren las comunidades indígenas está ligada a eso también. También las violencias de las granjas y demás. Bueno, el tema de los menonitas se puede interpretar de ese lado y hay muchos, insisto, expertos que lo están ligando a eso, ¿no? Un plan sistemático también promovido desde el poder político para blanquear la península de Yucatán, ¿no? Que además tiene una historia muy larga de resistencias, de intento de separatismo promovido justamente por las comunidades mayas.
From your experience, does promoting policies and laws or exposing these companies, through journalism, does it do anything to hold them accountable and stop their destructive actions? So I think anyone who wants to take this question can go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's one way. Last few months we were been doing investigations in partnership with organizations that are preparing or are preparing like lawsuits against companies in the US, in Europe, in countries in Europe, due to their relations to human rights violations and criminal environmental crimes in abroad. For example, there is a litigation, a judicial case in French against the French banks that invested in JBS. And the lawyers in French are saying that the French banks are doing money laundering because they are using their money to invest in JBS, that in turns is supporting human rights violations in Brazil. So in one way or another, they will have to take accountability, or they will have to review their due diligence process. If not for the articles that we do on journalism or the actions of activists, they will have to do this because they are being pressured in the justice level or in the economic level. So we have several examples of these from the past few years, and it's like in a strategy of some activist groups, to pressure them in court. I give you the example of the French banks, but there is also coffee and cocoa companies that are being sued in the US due to slave labor cases in Brazil and in countries in Africa. So this is it's a common strategy among some civil society organizations.
So if I may add, I think a very interesting case comes also from Marcel Gomes from Reporter Brazil. I think his investigation that linked the deforestation with meat being exported was one of the reasons that the EU policy deforestation law happened in the EU, in the European Union. So it definitely works, and this is why Brighter Green has also set up this Animals and Biodiversity Fund because we see that it works. Of course, it's not easy. It's huge work behind, but it does work. Yeah.
So we should start wrapping up. I know that the speakers have other commitments. I know that the interpreter has already worked a lot. Before we wrap up, and I'm going to also still give a bit of information about upcoming webinars and so on. Before we do that, I wanted to ask the speakers if there's any last comment that you would like to share.
I just want to say thank you for the invitation. And I saw one question about if during our fields, journalistic fields, if we eat meat, or I think was something like this, the question. And I was thinking that some are we might be vegan, vegetarian, or eat meat, but we also drink coffee, orange juice, we wear clothes, I mean, in one of these products, that will be labor exploitation. And unfortunately, there will be environmental impacts because it's how our economic system was built. Unfortunately, we live in an economic system built under this kind of violations. So I think my contribution as a journalist is to trying to change this, but by doing the investigations and pressing these economic forces and held them accountable for their impacts in the world. So yeah, I just want to share this last thought, but it's difficult. I mean, it's there's always a product when someone was exploited. So it's very difficult to live in this world right now.
All right. So if nobody else has some last comments, I want to just read a comment that I think we all agree with by Jenny Fernandez, which is you investigative journalists are phenomenal. Thank you for what you do and stay safe. I think we can all agree with that. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the remainder of the series. Tomorrow, Chema and I, Chema is the other founder of STC, he was in Belém with me. Tomorrow, we're going to speak about both the history and the culture of grazing, cattle ranching in North America in particular, but also connecting it a bit with especially what Poliana has spoken about in Brazil. We wanted to really create some links there and show that there's a common history here in the Americas. So we're going to speak a bit about that, and then we're going to start turning this webinar series towards the question of solutions. And, you know, we're going to explore that further, but tomorrow we're already going to start speaking about what could solutions look like. And for that, we're going to look both at the ancient past, we're going to look to Mesoamerican indigenous traditions, and also we're going to look at the recent past, the activism that we have done, the work that others are doing, you know, what farmers are doing today in particular. So that's going to be tomorrow. So I encourage you to sign up and I encourage you to share that with people. Also, next Saturday, so Saturday 21st, we're going to have the director of a local organization called Western Watersheds Project, who is going to join us, and he is going to talk about the ecological, also some social aspects, political aspects, but mainly the ecological effects of public lands ranching in the Western United States. And he's also going to speak a bit about the situation in Point Reyes National Park, which is just north of San Francisco. And I, in particular, wanted him to speak about Point Reyes, not only because the conflict there between the dairy farmers and the environmentalists is representative of a lot of these dynamics in more generally, but also because the environmentalists have recently had some wins there. And I think that we can look to that to get lessons as activists about how can we also have wins elsewhere. So that will also be a continuation of today's webinar that I think if you were interested today, you'll find that very interesting as well. And then we'll be joined by a veganic farmer the following day. And then for the last webinar, what I really wanted to do was sort of bring it all together, both do a report back about COP30, the Peoples Summit, what worked, what didn't work, where should we put our energy in the future. I would welcome other people's thoughts as well, and then also bringing it with together with the topics that we'll have touched upon in these webinars. All right. Oh, and Patricio also had some final comments.
Ah, ok. Ok, pensaba que no. No, una cosa que quería comentar justamente hoy que había escuchado esto de la pregunta sobre si consumimos carne y demás, y ligarlo con la situación de los territorios, de lo que pasa exclusivamente aquí en la península de Yucatán. El consumo de cerdo por parte de las comunidades mayas es histórico, ¿no? El cerdo no es americano, o sea, lo trajeron los españoles y demás, pero sí se generaron algunas razas locales. Y sí existe, o existía mayormente, una economía que se le llama la comida de traspatio, ¿no? Esto es la crianza del cerdo en el hogar, ¿no? Que tengas uno, dos o tres cerdos, como tendrías tus gallinas o haces la milpa para tener tu maíz, etcétera. Eso funcionó siempre de esa manera, no es que necesitaban 50.000 cerdos y 800 granjas, ¿no? No, no, eso es meramente industrial, es meramente exportador, como yo lo comentaba. Entonces, a veces se pone el foco en qué es lo que consumen las personas. La realidad es que el problema de las megagranjas de Yucatán no es generado por la población de Yucatán y menos por la población maya de Yucatán, ¿no? Y lo que quería comentarles es que cuando, esto me lo explicaron en una de las comunidades que están en resistencia, cuando inicia la expansión de este modelo, ¿no? Yo les decía hace más o menos 2 décadas, el gobierno del estado establece una prohibición en algunas comunidades de la crianza del cerdo pelón. El cerdo pelón es un cerdo negro, ¿no? Bastante peludo, que es el cerdo que siempre han comido las comunidades, el de la economía de traspatio, tener uno o dos cerdos en casa. Lo que dice el gobierno de Yucatán en ese momento es que básicamente los cerdos podían transmitirle enfermedades a los cerdos industriales y que había que preservar los cerdos de las granjas porque eran los que generaban los empleos. Y básicamente en algunas comunidades indígenas hubo un exterminio promovido por el gobierno local para acabar con esos cerdos porque supuestamente iban a enfermar a los cerdos de las empresas. ¿No? Se reemplazó por otras razas, el cerdo americano, que es un cerdo más blanco, es el cerdo rosado este de las publicidades, ese es el que predominó y la gente comenzó igualmente a recuperar el cerdo pelón y hoy en algunas poblaciones uno encuentra que a veces los tienen de manera furtiva o clandestino, ¿no? Porque sigue esta idea de que el cerdo no se puede criar porque va a contaminar a los cerdos de las granjas. Entonces, de vuelta, ¿no? O sea, tomar en cuenta que los cambios que se han generado no han sido por las poblaciones o por los consumos en sí de las poblaciones, porque este modelo no aspira a abastecer el mercado local. Es un modelo extractivista con el foco puesto en abastecer al denominado primer mundo o al norte global, en detrimento de lo que sería la alimentación local. Y eso es lo que ha generado también pérdida de soberanía alimentaria. El maíz ya lo tenés que comprar en una tortillería, hoy viene modificado genéticamente. Las tortillas se preparan en otro lado y la carne que se está generando va a otro lugar y lo que uno puede comprar a nivel local es el descarte que no se ha exportado a otros países. Lo que las mismas empresas porcícolas consideran que no es apto para abastecer a Estados Unidos, a Canadá, a China o a Europa, es lo que aquí se vende en las carnicerías más baratas, ¿no? Y mientras sigue esta idea de que no pueden criar sus propios cerdos porque van a contaminar y van a complicar el negocio de estas empresas, ¿no? Entonces, ese es el consumo que hay que revisar. El consumo globalizado, el consumo de los grandes mercados y del norte global, y no poner por ahí el foco en estas personas que toda su vida se autoabastecieron y no necesitaban 800 granjas de 60.000 cerdos cada una, ¿no? Eso era. Gracias.
Thank you so much, everyone. So I wanted to say, if you want to support See the Commons, of course, we are always happy to get donations. That's very helpful. Chema has put a link in the chat for donations. But what I also wanted to say is that, and those of you who get our newsletter probably already know, but we recently created these little tote bags. So I'll put it here so you can read. One of the things that we have focused a lot on in the past years has been promoting a transition to veganic farming, and I think that this is a cute way to do that. So we have these tote bags, and we haven't yet put them for sale on the website, but if you want one, I think they're $20, and then you would need to pay for shipping. So if you want one, just email us, contact us, and we can set you up with that. All right. So I'm going to let everyone go, and I hope to see you all again tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much again to the speakers, and also thank you to Louis. I know that this was a lot of work, and I really appreciate that you helping us has allowed us to actually have this exchange.
Thank you,
Bye
everyone.
bye. Thank you.
Chao, gracias.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Un gran abrazo.
Thank you.